something that I've noticed, particularly among baby Christians. Start talking to them, and we don't just end up talking about Jesus and what he's done in their lives. But I've noticed that many of them will also bring up these points about their opinion that the Apollo missions were fake, the moon landings were a hoax. They talk about the New World Order, the Illuminati, FEMA camps, and, trains with shackles in them, and all the typical things I'm sure everyone's somewhat familiar with. And I'm not saying this to deride them or to judge or condemn them, but my problem with this is when we lose our focus on the gospel. And I think what happens when people get saved and why they gravitate towards these conspiracy theories is, when they see that the truth is in Christ and they start to view him as their ultimate authority figure, it causes them to reevaluate what they've been taught and to really question other authority figures, worldly authority figures.
You're listening to Canary Cry Radio. Now here are your hosts, Basil and Gonz.
Hey everyone, welcome again to Canary Cry Radio. Thanks again for tuning in this week. My name's Basil.
And I'm Gonz, and we have the better half of the Revelations Radio News co-host. We had Andrew Hoffman on a couple weeks ago, but we saved the best for last, and it's Tim Kilkenny. How you doing, Tim?
Pretty good. I don't know if I can live up to that introduction. I think that Andrew may be the better half, but I'm at least the better looking half, I guess.
That's what we meant, actually. I have that down in my notes here. No, Andrew, we love you. Don't worry. Well, cool. I'm glad we got you on here as well. We, you had a little audio shout out in Andrew's episode, so I'm glad you made it.
Yeah, you guys were giving me a lot of crap. That was pretty funny. I enjoyed that.
Well, we didn't mention you for like the first half hour, and then it was like, oh yeah, we should probably mention Tim because he's like part of the show of, but anyway. So we wanted to, well, first off, give us a short little synopsis of like how you started Revelations Radio News, and didn't you have a show before that as well?
Yeah, I did. Before Revelations Radio News, I actually had a show called The Tim and Mike Show. And I don't know how long you guys been listening to the Revelations Radio Network, but it was originally started by Frank Lordy. Do you guys remember him, or you were around then? Or no?
I wasn't around, but I know of him because I've heard enough of between Chris White and yourself and others. Sure. I know who he is and what he meant to Revelations Radio Network. So
right. Yeah. Well, okay, I'll explain to you real quick, and probably everybody else doesn't. So, Frank Lordy was the creator of Revelations Radio Network. He was the one, I think, who actually sought out all the different podcasts and brought them together under one RSS feed. And it was just, something that I think was kind of, I know it was life-changing for several people, including myself, and probably many more than we'll ever know, at least in this life. But one of the things that they used to do was, Frank was incredibly empirical. He would like to try and figure out the news, try and figure out the financial side of things, and was always looking at, the propaganda behind the propaganda, trying to find underlying themes. And to be honest, he's one of the best people, I think, who has ever done that, as far as I know of. Some of the things that he predicted or said would be an issue in 2000, I don't even know when he stopped. I think it was 2010, 2009, I think. Some of the things that he was predicting in 2008-ish area are now coming to fruition. I mean, he was just really good. Anyway, he used to do a show where he would get with Chris White, and they would do a show on Wednesdays called the Frank and Chris Show. Right. And the Frank and Chris Show was one of my all-time favorite shows because it was, it was Frank's, kind of empirical, let's get to the bottom of this stuff. And then it was Chris White's whole, show me another new age propagandist so I can debunk him. Right. Because it really was the height of him. He was debunking one every 6 months. Right. Tisari, and it got his YouTube account busted. And then, he calls into, I think he actually calls into Alex Jones at some point, gets on the show talking about how Zeitgeist was a propaganda piece. And Frank Lordy was supposedly talking to Alex Jones at different points. And it was kind of like a really cool point of the network. Wow. And then Frank, some things happen or whatever. Frank stops doing it. He actually took down the whole network. So Chris actually comes and gets the network from him and kind of saves it, brings it back up. And Frank retires. And we kind of carry on. And for a while there, during the Frank and Chris show era, we used to meet up on Wednesdays on TalkShoe, and just, everybody would sit in the chat room, talk to each other, and pray about different stuff or whatever. And Frank and Chris would try and figure out, what's going on about, different things. And one of the things that, it was just such an important show and an important time for my coming of age as a Christian, because it just provided like a group of people who were like-minded around the world, who were interested in the same things I was interested in, and who were kind of had their guard down and were there amongst each other, and right. Just in the chat room, just talking and praying and stuff, several times felt the Holy Spirit, and just a lot of fun was had there. So when the Frank and Chris show, stopped, because of course Frank was no longer there was no live show on Wednesdays, and it just felt like there was something missing there. So after a while, me and Mike had been talking a bit on the phone, and Mike Gabinelli is a guy who also kind of was around the network at that point too. There's actually a few, like one podcast I know of in particular where Frank actually mentions him or whatever. But Mike was around, and we were talking to each other on the phone about this sort of stuff, and just kind of had kind of evaluated that both of us had led kind of different lives before coming to Christ, and right. And just it was kind of the weirdest thing. I was in church one morning and I was praying, and I just had this really moving experience. I just said, Lord, I'm not doing enough for you. What I feel, I almost felt guilty or something. So I felt convicted, like I need to do more for you, Lord. If you could, point to something bigger that I'll do, I'll do it, Lord. I'll do it. And I left, and I'm just thinking like, oh man, what's going to happen? Am I going to get
what have I gotten myself into?
Yeah, I was like, and I'm picturing something, like I'm going to go to Egypt or something, I don't know. Right? And I get home and I have this, like, I think it was a Facebook message or comment from Mike, and he's like, let's start doing our own podcast. Wow. And I was like,
just right there.
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay. I'm like, I'm not going to do my own podcast, whatever. And it was like, about 10 minutes after I'd shut the computer off after seeing that message or whatever, that I realized, I was like, oh no, that's it. That's it. That's what I had been praying for. And part of the reason I said, oh no, is because I knew what a responsibility it was. But on the other hand, I was, kind of excited and totally scared. So anyway, we started the Tim and Mike show, and it was essentially an exercise in coming of age and podcasting. Right. From the beginning, it had a very rough start. So that's kind of where that show got started.
Well, how long did you guys do Tim and Mike?
Tim and Mike's show was, I think it's only about 60 something episodes. We started in October of 2010, and I think we just wrapped it up this past February. So it's something like a little over a year, maybe 60 something episodes or so. And like I said, the one thing that I felt like when we both started that show was that, we didn't know anything about anything. We're just rookies in podcasting and conspiracy stuff and everything. So we didn't try and make it like we're going to get to the bottom of stuff. It was more just like a place to meet and have fellowship. So some of the episodes, you go back and, there's moments of silence and we're like, well, what are we going to talk about now and stuff. But other ones, it's a lot more moving where, I'm like convicted about something, or he's convicted about something, or somebody calls in that needs to hear the gospel, or, there was one episode where like Dr. Future is like on the phone with us, and there's a Muslim guy in the chat room who's asking about, what's Christianity all about. And Dr. Future like gets a chance to witness to him like directly. I'm like almost in tears. Wow. And then Dr. Future tells me afterwards, he's like, I just got, he after I didn't know this at the time, but he says, earlier this evening I was in a class about how to witness to Muslims. And I came home and got on your show, and there was a Muslim in the chat room, and he said, I just thought, gosh, this is pretty quick, So there's some amazing moments, but there's also a whole lot of moments where like me and Michael tell like bad jokes, or there'll be awkward silences or whatever. So I'm proud of it as a whole because I think it had a good effect for the kingdom, but podcast wise, I don't know how intriguing it would be.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, me and Gonz definitely know how the rookie game is. I think I'd still classify us there, but
you guys are doing a great job.
Well, shucks, Tim. So yeah, very cool. And then from there, how'd that turn into Revelations Radio News?
Sure. Yeah. From there, I was looking and I was still missing that, it's funny, I'm going to mention his name this many times, but I was still missing that Frank Lordy kind of empirical look at things. And I don't mean that to be offensive to anybody else that's on the network, because there are plenty of people who are looking at the news on Revelations Radio Network that are worth listening to. For instance, Future Quake was doing at the time, I don't think that we started Revelations Radio News, I think in last August. Future Quake wasn't wrapping up, but they were doing Tomorrow's Tremors and kind of doing their thing. And Derek and Sharon, they're always kind of going through the news and doing their thing. But I just felt like there was I'm going to probably get in trouble for this if anybody hears it, but maybe the younger voice, our generation, kind of the younger crowd, right, missing from dissecting the news. And I didn't, Chris, as far as I'm concerned, is handling the spiritual New Age deception side of it, right?
Yeah.
Like all we can do is supplement his work. So I'm looking at it and thinking, Chris isn't doing the news anymore. Frank used to do the news. Somebody needs to do a young kind of, voice about the news because I'm missing that. Every day I'm like trying to pick through the news and trying to figure out, what would with a Christian worldview, what would someone say about this?
Right.
And I had met Andrew at the one of the conferences the year past, couple years before in Nashville, and I didn't know that he had actually just written a book and was kind of just new to the game at that point, and I didn't, we just kind of met and like started talking. It was one of those awesome conversations where anything you say, the other one's like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Just that doesn't happen very often
just very rare in our circles where you can like talk about Nephilim, the Federal Reserve, or
right.
abuse or something, and they can stay with you the whole time.
Right.
So we were fast friends, and I just thought, he's written this one book. He said he was going to write another. He doesn't seem to be doing that. Man, maybe he can, help me do this. And I was kind of hoping to lean on a lot of his work, and probably still do quite a bit to kind of evaluate it. And it's another one where we start off, we don't even know what we're doing. I mean, even just last month, we decided we'll try and go to a live network, which is a little more secular network, and that's not really our gig. We're still trying to do more things and trying to get the word out, or I don't know. I'm just trying to produce content because I think I shared with you guys a little bit off air that, if it wasn't for alternative Christian media, I wouldn't be where I am. I probably wouldn't even be a Christian.
Right. Yeah. And that's actually kind of what we wanted to talk about, was this idea of alternative media, which includes yourself and me and Gonz and, essentially Revelations Radio Network all together, and sort of this hive. So, I mean, what do you think the importance is, or even what is alternative media? I mean, just for those laymen who aren't, kind of savvy to that.
Sure. I think alternative Christian media is kind of, it's a natural end to a generation that has gone through the Disneyfication of the Bible in church.
Right.
And I really am, I look back on my childhood and, everybody, can see different themes throughout their life. But one of the consistent themes that I look back on and see is that the church was so Disneyfied, but the Bible was so, like there wasn't any, questions that actually you can...
Disneyfied, that's a good word.
And I don't mean this to be, derogatory towards the church or whatnot, but,
Well, I mean, if you think about some of the things that we grew up with. I mean, I remember watching some, and that obviously it's a kid's show, and I'm sure this guy has done great work, but it was a donut guy. It was a donut preaching the word of God, and a baker. And so, I mean, growing up in a Christian home, and you see enough of that kind of stuff. Not to put that stuff down. I mean, the kids need Jesus too, but I mean, even Veggie Tales and stuff like that. At least for me, this might not have been what you were referring to, but it kind of puts the whole truth and kind of gnarly reality of the Bible, kind of numbs it from being, subjected to that kind of stuff as a kid. Sure.
And I think that I think it's kind of in reference to what you're talking about, like once you start to realize that, hey, the Bible is outlawed in many countries, and it's been outlawed through most of time in many different places around the world, then you start to see like, hey, maybe, the donut that's telling me this stuff, isn't the end of isn't the end of reality here. Right. And I think what I'm kind of referencing is the fact that, as a teen or young teen adult, looking for answers, looking for things to look into, like, I really wish that somebody would have told me that there was witches and giants and spells and, just absolute, kind of craziness going on in the Bible. Because what we have, I think, now is a generation of kids who have been brought up where that stuff wasn't mentioned. Everybody, right. And there's this weird disconnect, like this double think, like, yeah, everybody knows about David and Goliath, but if you ask somebody the giants ever exist, they'll say no. It's like, well, what happened? In the Bible, it straight says that the guy is 10 feet tall. Then right. Why is it that this, you don't think the giants exist?
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
With the Disneyfication, as I keep saying over and over again, it's, I lost interest in the church. And it's not the fault of the church, I don't think. But I do think that if there was someone there, when I'm a young adult, to just explain, like, or even just to broach, or, some of these topics, I think that I might have gone a different way. And the interesting part about that is that I kind of have a similar experience in school, where I'm learning, through school that essentially, you go. I have this very, very hate relationship with institutionalized schooling, but when you go through it, you essentially just memorize everything they want you to memorize, and then you put it all on a piece of paper afterwards, and then you get a grade according to that. And there's no like actual searching for truth. You're just memorizing what they want you to tell. So later in life, when I'm looking for answers and I start to come across the Nephilim, or start to come across like the Federal Reserve, or start to come across these things, which many of us in our generation, because of the benefit of the internet, have come across. Right. The answers, it turns out, points me right back to Jesus, where I started, and I had been kind of running from for quite a while. And I had originally thought, like, oh, I'm so much bigger than what my church upbringing was. Right. But I just don't feel like that the church, the gospel, the Bible that I was taught as a kid was as big as it is. I mean, it's just enormous. And I don't know, maybe that's just being too critical of it. But I feel like there's a lot of kids in our generation who just think that the Bible is this small-minded book, and not this absolute, wonderful, mysterious, never could you learn every bit of it. Right. Book it really is. And I think when people can start to find that, then they come to the truth, and then they're face to face with it. And I think that's what we need. We need more of that. And that's why when you guys came on the network, I was so excited. I'm like, perfect. Between, Revelations Radio News and this show, maybe we can bring in more people and show them that, Christians do care about this stuff. We do know about it. We do want to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think a big thing too, and Revelations Radio Network was so big for my walk as well, because it was discovering L.A. Marzulli on Coast to Coast, and that led to PID Radio and then Revelations Radio Network. It was kind of like I feel like it was the net that caught me. Amen. Before I fell all the way away, you know what I mean? Because I had just been saved. It's been a couple years, and it was like, okay, it made sense. The gospel message made sense to me, but at the same time, I had so many questions because I was naturally into conspiracy theories and UFOs and all this stuff. And I'm going, okay, well, let's put this thing, Christianity and the Bible, let's put it to the ultimate test in my mind, is all this other stuff, conspiracies, the government, blah, blah, blah. What, if this document, this scripture is supposed to be inerrant and, reference all of history and all of mankind and everything entailing the entire history of humanity, then it should have some answers about all this, stuff that I've never heard about. And yeah, it was this network and the people on it that definitely helped me get those answers. And it was definitely life-changing because it's interesting too that both of you guys, I think if you I didn't grow up in the church, so I didn't have that sort of Disneyfication, if you will.
Yeah.
I didn't have that growing up, but at the same time, what's really interesting is that having only been a believer for a handful of years, I see it. I see the disconnect between the institutionalized church and some of this other stuff with prophecy, the Nephilim, sons of God, all this stuff. There's a huge disconnect, and it doesn't make sense to me because I don't know. I feel like there should be more continuity between the institution and then some of this other stuff. Prophecy should be something talked about more often, but it's one of the proofs of the Bible being something supernatural, and I don't understand why you would ignore that vital point.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and in my case, here's like how I like to explain it, which is I grew up in the church, and into my teen years and into my 20s almost even, spending so much time in the church, and my dad's a pastor, and this basically is my life. Went to Christian school. I mean, it just naturally becomes comfortable, or you get a complacency. Well, so there's that, and then there's the numbing of that whole thing with like the actual awesomeness of the Bible and the craziness of the spiritual things that actually happen. And then ever since I was a kid, I used to be on a ski team, and every morning, every weekend for like my younger life was spent skiing. And so we would drive to the place, and every morning, I don't know how this happened. I'm sure that Coast to Coast wasn't playing in the morning, but somehow I would listen to Coast to Coast with my dad in the car. So now I had these, and was super into it, and that just captured me, everything that was on there. But then later in my life, when I suddenly put these two sort of worlds together, it was like, mixing sodium and water or something. It just got out of control. And so here we go here. And I think that's really important. And I think that's a big thing for today. I think that's going to be a big aspect of new believers, especially in these crazy times.
Sure, it's like I think it was a Spurgeon quote where it just said basically you don't have to defend the Bible. The Bible is like a lion; you just let it loose.
Yeah,
and I think that's Basil, when you were going to ask all these questions, you're like, well, I'm interested in conspiracies. I'm interested in knowing all this stuff. How does this hold up to this this supposedly special scripture? It holds up perfectly.
Yeah,
it's talked about in there. It's and those are the parts that kids our age, people our age, are finding, and they're asking these questions. And the only one who's out there talking about these things, who's not the only one, but the majority of people who are out there talking about these things are going to take them down the wrong path. Yeah. And those are your David Icks and your Michael Tassarians, and sure, you can feel that there's a problem. You can feel that a lot of what's going on around us isn't supposed to be like this. You can almost feel the spiritual war that's going on around us. And when you really start to get in tune with that, which, I did, then you start to go in, the wrong direction. And especially when you start to kind of figure out these things, like about conspiracies or whatnot. And, I just, like you said, it was a safety net, and I couldn't agree more. Revelations Radio Network was a safety net. And it's, I look back on it and it's like, it's the most like, strange, mundane thing. But my friend decided that, hey, I'm going to watch this documentary. He orders it online and like gives it to me. He's like, man, you got to watch this. Apparently, the IRS is not even giving the government our money and it's all legal. And I'm like, what? That's crazy. And I just, I was totally just, lost in the matrix of it all. I didn't pay attention to politics. I had just got out of the Navy a few years previous and had a decent job. And somebody hands me Freedom to Fascism. And I go and start watching it, and like it starts. I'm like, whoa! Like I wasn't told this stuff, and then I start to kind of pursue this alternate, version of history or whatever. And eventually, I'm like, all of a sudden now I'm, if you fast forward a month or two of just hardcore, internet quote unquote research, which is a lot of me maybe not reading but watching YouTube videos. I don't know, maybe.
I think we all do that.
Yeah, but one of the things that happens though is that stuff starts to click, right?
Yeah.
When you start to learn about the Federal Reserve, stuff starts to click. You're like, whoa, that makes too much sense.
Yeah.
I don't want to believe it, but it makes too much sense. 9/11. That makes way too much sense. I don't want to believe it, but it makes too much sense. Then you get somebody like, David Icke saying, they're lizard people. They're all lizard people. And you're like, well, that sounds horrible. But then again, I can't imagine, satanic ritual abuse. So maybe they are lizards, Right. And then that's where the danger comes. Then you end up getting on a slippery slope. And then the things don't start to click, then all of a sudden now it's like, dude, all we got to do is get together. And, I got an email from, I had a brief stint with 9/11 Truth. And I got an email one time and the guy was just like, look, today's the day when the crystals in South America are going to be in the right frequency. And we all need to get together and clear our minds at 2:00 and send happy thoughts. And I'm just like, I'm not like a Christian yet, but I'm definitely headed in that direction. And I'm just thinking like, this is ridiculous. Like if you think like the stuff I'm reading about, the satanic ritual abuse and the stuff that they're doing, if you think getting together and thinking happy thoughts at 2:00 is going to do something, this isn't the answer for me. And then I started to search a little bit more. And I think one thing Chris White has done is pointed out how important that period is. And I look back at mine and I'm like textbook case. I'm lucky enough to have the foundation of the gospel when I was a child, but I left it. I mean, I totally just left it behind and kind of went my own way for several years. And then, once you start to kind of clear away, the brainwashing or whatever, you kind of like, it's such a scary time right then. And Chris White that's the whole reason I almost tell you right now he would back me up that's almost the whole reason Chris White got into this, because when you're cleared, of everything you knew as a child or whatever and start to realize that it was all a lie, it's extremely dangerous point.
Right. Because you can you're very fertile. So whatever gets planted there can be, it can become the belief system. But yeah, I think, some of the things, reflecting on some of the things you're saying, I had gotten really into listening to Jordan Maxwell and David Icke and David Wilcock. And that was the same time, what's interesting is they were the ones that really showed me a lot about the conspiracies, because they were really the big people talking about it on the internet, at least. I did the same thing. I went on YouTube, I looked for UFO, blah, blah, blah. And even like UFO in the Bible, or like Jesus and, aliens or something, just different combinations of words, because I was trying to put the two together. You're like, what is going on here,
Right.
And all of those, a lot of hits were, Project Camelot, a lot of these new age thinking people. And so it really started to make the whole idea of Jesus sort of wishy-washy. And it made it really watered down. I'm going, okay, well, I'm really confused now, because there's a group of people that I visit on Sundays telling me that, that this Jesus guy is God. And then I have another, these guys on the internet or whatever telling me that he's just another guru and we're going to be like him based on our ability to meditate and focus on nothing or whatever it is. So, I think the one interview that really captured my attention was when Chris White put out a podcast where he had been kind of set up, and they invited Jordan Maxwell on.
Oh yeah,
and they went at it for a while, and it was it was like a 20-minute podcast, but it was like, whoa, I always thought Jordan Maxwell was, I was a little suspicious, but at the same time, I thought he was giving out some good information, about the world government or in the Illuminati or whatever.
Sure. And he is.
Yeah, they all are, which is kind of the part that makes it hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
But just his character and how he responded to Chris was really kind of like, okay, that's really weird. Why would he get so upset? And Chris got pretty heated up too, but
yeah.
but it was moments like that, those podcasts that really, grabbed my attention more, like, oh wow, there's really, an answer here. So, and
there's really Christians out there that want to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing I want to try. Like, if anything, that's like the one message I want to get across is that, if you're out there searching, you can come across people who know about a lot of the stuff that you're interested in and believe in Jesus.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, some of that stuff on YouTube can be pretty dangerous, especially for somebody who, is seemingly pretty well rooted. I mean, I was spending some time doing some research on the enemy there for a little while, which is a dangerous thing to do. I came to find out because I'm watching all these, spiritual science videos. I forgot what I was exactly researching, and they start talking about energies and the big pulse that's coming in 2012, and then I start thinking like, well, God could have made us with energies, and he could be having a big pulse. That could be his thing. And then I'm like, hold on a second. Okay, let's go listen to something. It becomes very easy to start mixing things together, because it's sort of, I mean, you're already sort of in that mode where you're like, okay, like 9/11, all this stuff, it's fitting together, and the Bible and the Nephilim and everything's fitting together. Okay, cool, making connections, energy. Okay, this can fit here. Big pulse. Let's put this here. Chakras can fit. Wait a second. This stopped fitting together a long time ago.
Right.
Yeah, and I think actually it's really, you had mentioned, Tim, about just the youth, and right now when I look at youth culture, and youth culture being promoted by media anyway, is really into the supernatural elements of
anything supernatural.
Anything occult, right? It's like werewolves and witches and wizards, and it's all occult, and it's like
one of my favorite search terms for Canary Cry Radio is my babysitter's a vampire satanic? And I think that's like a Disney show or something.
It is a Disney show.
We've gotten plenty of hits for that. I'm like,
maybe Disneyfication was the wrong word to describe the church. I think that
I actually did write a blog post a few weeks ago that talked about that show, because they were prancing around basically in the episode. They're high school kids or whatever, but half of them the girls are vampires, and but they're good guys or whatever.
Right.
And there's a new girl in the school, and she's she just happens to be like the resurrection of some old ancient goddess or something, and she's trying to resurrect her like god husband or whatever, who's like the sun god. Okay. And so so she like hypnotizes all the guys with her looks and all this stuff. And by the end of the show, they have like 15 guys that are, they're probably teenagers or late teens or something. I mean, yes, it's a TV show, but they're acting, quote unquote, but they're still carrying out this thing where they're holding this crystal skull and they're walking around, the school campus, like chanting something and following this chick around. Wow. And it's like, and at the end, it's, I don't know. Anyway, my point is like,
it's really intense.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And I'm watching this going, this is Disney Channel, right? Like, this is what I think it is. Like, how many millions of kids are watching this right now? And just being like, oh yeah, wouldn't it be cool if we can hypnotize or be a vampire or whatever? And I feel like that's where the kids are kind of getting their culture and whatnot, and the church isn't really doing anything about it. They're at least, from my perspective of working in a student ministries, at least from a tech standpoint, which again, I don't get to control any content driven stuff. So it's not, I'm only observing what I've seen, but
sure,
it's not that it's bad, but it doesn't really address those issues. And I'm I don't know. Part of me sometimes loses faith in a little bit of this and like thinks, well, maybe kids just really, maybe they're really not into it. Maybe they're not really interested at all. But I gotta think that they are because it's everywhere. It's everywhere, all over the TVs and internet and everything.
Right. And I mean, it just brings up the point of, the mainstream media just shaping the culture to, whoever which is the biggest, I think is the biggest disaster of modern humanity, which is the beast that is, the mass media. Just because of just how much power it is and how much, how secretly it can change culture just on its own, and how oblivious even some people in the industry are to it. I spent some time trying my hand at the industry, and that's what I went to school for. And it's like, well, first of all, just the oppression you feel with everybody working in that industry is just palpable. But then at the same time, you see the stories being told and the things being shown on television, and they just totally go against what some of the crew are. Like, for instance, I will know Christians who will work on things like My Babysitter's a Vampire, and just be completely oblivious to how absurdly satanic the thing seems to be. And it just goes to show how powerful just the beast, the spiritual beast, the reigning of, the entity, the spiritual entities over what we call the mass media, and, the propaganda and everything that goes with it.
Sure. Wasn't it William Ramsey who's on your show who said that J.K. Rowling's middle name isn't even start with a K?
Yeah, right. She changed it allegedly.
But she changed it allegedly because of the end of the word magic.
Right.
In Crowley's sense. So there you go. You have, in most of the church, approved of Harry Potter. Right. Not, I won't say most, but a good deal of it. It's okay. It's just playing around, and they're actually kind of experimenting then with the occult. One thing I think if you want to look at the mainstream media shaping perceptions without any alternative views, you just have to look at your parents, because your parents grew up with only TV. Like when TV first started, it was like the truth. Like Walter Cronkite was on, there was only 3 channels, and they would tell you the truth.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons it's so hard to snap them out of this paradigm that, hey, everything on TV isn't true. They'll give you lip service like, oh, yeah, of course, I only listen to Glenn Beck. Everything's not true. And I've struggled with that. But one of the reason I think alternative Christian media is so important is because we're a different generation. And while there is the beast system that does reign supreme, over the TV and much of the culture, there still is the internet. Right. And when people go to the internet, they can find something different. And more kids in our generation are apt to look and ask a question, was 9/11 the real deal? Right. And maybe I'm not giving our parents enough credit because, they didn't have the internet. And that's just, if they did, they would have looked up, was Kennedy assassinated by our own government or something, and they would have woke up. But I think in this dragnet that takes place, or not necessarily dragnet, but where people are basically looking for other answers, I think alternative Christian media is extremely important, and mainly because, I almost fell into this, I actually watched Zeitgeist, and I had been raised in a Christian home, and I had left the faith or whatever, and just wasn't, just kind of wasn't for me. I'll find my own way. Jesus can't be the only way. That's just the way I was born into, right? And find Zeitgeist, and it scared the dickens out of me.
Right. Well, yeah, I was the same way. It was, and even in our generation, even when we were kids, the internet was so new that it wasn't as widespread as it is now. I mean, I remember when Fahrenheit 9/11 came out, and you're like, I mean, some people.
That's the truth, man. Yeah, that's anti the Bush family. That's gotta be real.
Yeah, exactly. And I had no other I wasn't going on the internet to do this. I mean, some of this, I was younger, but at the same time, I mean, it's the internet is a whole new creation or creature than it was even 5 years ago. I mean,
yeah,
it's just evolving so much, and it's projected by, many a professional that the internet is soon going to take over TV too, or as well. But it's nice that we can still have our own place on the internet, even though the major companies are, adapting to the changes.
And I think that's what's important is where Gonz was looking for different answers and coming across Tessarian and Jordan Maxwell and those folks. What makes up a good disinfo agent is that they have 90% truth or even 95% truth, and it's just that little bit that they have that's a lie.
Right.
And every single one of them has their part about Jesus isn't real, or he's just the sun god, or he's just this.
Right.
And I think that's the enemy. I mean, that's what we should be fighting out. We should be out here talking about the exact same things that they're talking about, but on the other hand saying, but Jesus is real, and he saved my life, and he can save yours, and it's all that's important.
Right. Yeah, I'm so happy that there is a community online, because I think, for a while, that's why I think when Basil and I met, it was sort of like really? Like, about some of this stuff, and because, we were in the same church and stuff, and up until that point, and I wrote about this a little bit in the articles that I wrote, Christian Conspiracy Theorist, but it's sort of a dangerous thing, because you really can fall into a sense of isolation and how you don't belong, and I can't relate to anybody in my church, and I think it's a bigger problem than it seems, because we don't hear about it. People are going through this that we don't know about, but they don't continue to press the issue because they don't get the answers right away. They kind of just put it aside, they sweep it under the rug, and they kind of just go on.
Right. And these things happen in the privacy of your own home. Like, you don't know about them happening.
Exactly.
But the sheer success, not that he's a rich man in any stretch of the imagination, of Chris.
Yeah.
Just because he's search engine optimized, and he brings the truth, and he gets, trillions of emails and is probably responsible for more conversions than we'll ever know.
Right.
But that's because people in the privacy of their own home Google, is Jesus real, and was 9/11 an inside job?
Right.
And those things, and I just want more people out there like yourselves, like Chris White, like, PID, like Future Quake was, to be able to grab them. And because I almost went down that road, and that's why I have a heart for it. Like I said, I watched, Zeitgeist, and I wasn't convinced, but I was scared,
Yeah.
And I think I Googled, Zeitgeist is, can't be real or whatever. And I think the first one I came across was like, I don't know, it was like some written thing. And the guy, was writing a letter to his son about how it wasn't real. And he debunked like every point in part one and like lays it all out. And then he says, I'm not even going to go to part 2 and 3, because if that much is wrong in part 1, then of course you don't have to. Anyway, it was kind of funny because I thought, wait a second, part 2 and 3 are totally fine.
Yeah,
it's part 1 I'm worried about.
Yeah,
but the next person I found was Chris, and then it was this shock to the system. It's like, okay, wait a second. So there's this Illuminati group, right? And they're doing some terrible, terrible things, and then there's this guy, he knows about it, but he still thinks Jesus is the answer. What's the deal here? That doesn't even make sense.
Right.
Yeah, no, totally. Chris has been definitely a big encourager for me to even start, media stuff.
Sure, and your movie, I mean, it's only been out a year or two, and it almost has 1 million views already.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know.
That's awesome, man. So you're out there doing the exact thing we're talking about. I really need to get some of our stuff up on YouTube and do that. I have a channel, and I have like 1,000 subscribers or something, but I don't take any credit for that, because all I did was repost other people's videos. But, one day I just saw, someone else that I knew, I think it was Mike from the Tim and Mike Show, that he had just reposted all the videos. He's like, who cares? That I don't get, I give them credit and I just put them up on mine. It's just putting the stuff out there. So,
yeah.
I started doing the same thing, but I really need to get back on there, because that's where the people are. I mean, that's where I was searching, and I think that's where a lot of people are searching for the truth. So
yeah, which is really interesting. I think there is a little bit of, just going a little bit back to the alternative media,
Sure.
it seems like with the money, flowing into more people being interested in sort of an alternative media outlet, and as money kind of trickles in, I've sort of seen, I don't want to say a decay, but just sort of a commercialization of like a non-Christian alternative media stream. Right. I don't exactly know specifically, but it just seems like the more commercial it gets, it's sort of losing its purity, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a good example might be Alex Jones.
Sure.
Yeah. As a secular example. I mean, what the guy has to say is what the guy has to say, but, the entire thing has become, go to Survivor Mall, get your Survivor stuff.
He did a live reading the other day. I guess he's been doing them, but I actually went back to listen to an Alex Jones. Right. He did a live reading, and I was like, oh man, that's where we are now. Like,
yeah,
because it's hard to hear like, oh, this guy's going to tell me the truth, and then in the break, he's like, well, my family and I lost 8 pounds when I started doing this and this and this, and it's like, the thing about it is like, dude, you are supposedly giving out truth, and now every 15 minutes I got to hear about how you lost 8 pounds in a month, and I'm not real sure you did. It's starting to, Yeah, and I agree 100% that it is kind of a direction that some of the alternative media has been going.
Well, and it's a fine line because I mean, alternative media, they have bills. Bills happen, and it's we should be supporting them. Without the support for alternative media, it wouldn't exist. I mean, it would rely on the hobbyists. Yeah. And so it's a very fine line, but it's a line that you can see pretty well. You feel it. There's a difference between Alex Jones having a store and some survival things, and then giving his weight loss testimonials and and things like that. So it's something that you can feel, and it's easy to more or less easy to discern. So it shouldn't be I don't think a huge point of contention, but still a factor when it comes into alternative media.
Well, I also think like, where does the hope come from with alternative media outlets? Because
sorry, I could totally take off.
Go ahead.
Okay, that really was one of the reasons I forgot to mention that I got into it, was because making people scared is like shooting fish in a barrel. Right. And I just felt like that every place I turned when I was looking for news was just something else that was going to make me scared. AJ, I'm a little harsher on him than I think Andrew is, but I'm not, like, oh my gosh, he's an age and everything else. Right. But AJ. I think that's one of the things, Alex Jones. I mean, and that's one of the things about him that has always, kind of bothered me, is that he can produce that fear. Right. And he's not as bad as like some of the others. You start to get on YouTube and you start to get into individuals who are just vlogging and trying to figure it out. It's like every other month, we're going to get hit by a comet, or there's going to be this giant false flag, and the Simpsons told me all about it. Right. And, it's so easy. And like Gonz mentioned a second ago, these people that are searching for these things are alone in front of their computer in a private place. And then it's just like someone's on there, the Simpsons episode predicted 9/11, and now the Simpsons predicted that 11/11/11, we're all going to die. And, you start looking, and you start getting, this guy, he knows 9/11 truth is real. He knows the Federal Reserve, and now he thinks the Simpsons is going to predict our, the end of the world. And it's so easy to do that. It's so easy to get on, and you can get tons of views. Right. But to responsibly bring content and talk about things that are hard to talk about and that may have had dire consequences for humanity, us individuals in the future, but do it calmly and be able to point to Jesus as a higher power. That was one of the main reasons I loved Future Quake. Future Quake was an amazing show, and they would take on false flags, they would take on aliens, they would take on anything, and the whole time they were cracking jokes and praying, saying Jesus is the answer. And that made such a big impact on me. And if I can do half, a quarter of what they did in that, where I'm presenting the news and we're not getting scared. Getting scared is so easy. And that's another theme I talk about on the Revelations Radio News, is that it seems like every other year they know the alternative media is there, and they'll send like a horrible story down the pipeline, I swear, just to see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I swear they sit back and laugh, like, watch this, we'll tell them swine flu is real. And then like now all of a sudden you almost have the same thing going on in the alternative media that you have in the mainstream media, in that fear is what people, is what sells, is what people are interested in. So then we start to do it, the Gulf oil incident. Oh, it's in Revelation. The water is turning red. This is the seventh seal. And, it just seems like every year there's one of those stories that they throw down, the hole just to see what comes out. And of course, like clockwork, we all, a lot of us take the bait and we're like, oh, we're all going to die. What are we going to do? Let's get around our crystals and think positive thoughts.
Well, that's the thing is that the solutions that are, the potential solutions that they provide are either one, ourselves, right? A lot of the New Agers are talking about, we are the change. Like we have
the consciousness.
Yeah.
Band together. Together we can defeat them.
It's all your consciousness, dude.
Yeah. Or it's like, get your guns out, stock up. Like
exactly.
It's just, there's nothing that's like, no, it's beyond just this physical thing. It's a spiritual battle. Amen. And it's really, Jesus has to be the answer, because there's no other thing that makes sense. Like nothing else that we do is going to change what's already happening in the bigger scheme of things with government, and trickles all the way back to this, the idea of mainstream media and propaganda. But it's like, there's nothing that we can do. Electing Ron Paul wouldn't have really changed a whole lot, I don't think. Like, it might have for a little bit, or it might have seemed like it, but ultimately I don't think it would have made that big of a difference, because he probably would have been shot and killed, or I don't know.
He's still going, man. He's still going. But yeah, no, and it totally makes sense, because if you think about it, there really is nothing that makes sense besides Jesus being the savior and the protector of the world and our souls and the future, and we can let go, and we don't need to worry about the Illuminati taking over the world, because a bunch of dudes from Illinois with guns isn't going to bring down the Illuminati. Sitting around in Kumbaya and your crystals glowing strange colors is not going to bring down the Illuminati or anything. So it's like, it's almost like there's no reason to fear, and admitting that and basing your reactions off of that. There's no reason to fear, because it's already taken care of. The enemy is already defeated, and we're just watching the show at this point.
Yeah, but it's also important to alarm people, and I think each one of us has a different job to do, as far as, for example, I picture someone like L.A. Marzulli to be a bigger bridge than people would think. He goes on coast to coast. He says Yeshua, his real name, instead of Jesus. He'll say, I remember in particular, the last time he was on, or maybe the time before that or something, he was very, it was interesting, because George Norrie was sort of trying to make him sound more religious, I think.
Right.
And LA is sitting there going, this isn't about religion. This isn't about, political garbage, and he goes right back into, all the stuff he goes into with the sons of God and the Nephilim and the alien deception and everything like that. And, preaching the gospel in such a unique way, it's just, only he can do it, Right. But I think there needs to be more of us out there that are sort of doing that.
Yeah, he's the only person I've ever heard use the word Christianese and be like dead serious about it. He's like, I don't like. He's like, I heard him speak at a conference. He's like, I don't like speaking in the Christianese. He says, you turn people off with that. He says, like, let's just talk about, the guidebook to the supernatural and this other stuff. And you just gotta sit back and be like, yeah, I can see how that would work a little better. Yeah. But
right.
I and that's the thing that's so cool about you guys doing this, and I encourage more people to do it, but anybody who's listened to this, who knows about the things that we know about and stuff, or, who has even a podcast, we have a job to do. Okay. There are many people in the world who are totally lost, and many of them are our friends. And we happen to know about, the truth about some things like September 11th and the true connections to, Nazism and the elite and, eugenics and, false flag attacks, all of these things. And a lot of our friends don't know about those things, but a lot of them also don't necessarily know that Jesus is the way or aren't living it. And because we do happen to know that, God has put us in a unique position to not spread fear, but to spread Him, because we know how dire the situation is. It's our responsibility to tell other people that, hey, this is what's going on here. This is what's going on here. I think this is what this is. This is a spiritual battle, and I swear, I sometimes must sound like a broken record to my girlfriend or some of my friends. I'm like, well, that's what do you think, Tim? Well, I think it's a demonic energy you're dealing with there. Well, that's what you said last time, right? And he's like, well, I'm talking to my dead grandpa, but what do you think, Tim? I think you're dealing with demonic energy. I had this weird, happenstance with, I was doing a bunch of drugs, and then the shadow guy came at me, and I said, yeah, you're dealing with the demonic, because it's everywhere. Our culture is saturated with it. Right. And we happen to know that. We do. Yeah. And therefore we have a responsibility to talk to people about it, because I don't want to bash the mainstream church. I love, to bash the mainstream church is silly, because it's like saying the body of Christ, like, oh yeah, God's not big enough to infiltrate the culture of Christianity, right? Which I'm not a huge fan of, but it's not a God's still working in the church. Yeah. But we happen to be living in this time. Each one of us could have been, living in some other time, in some other place. I know Basil would love to go back in time. I can tell from the Mars episode. But each person hearing my voice right now lives in this age of internet, in this age of a smaller world because of communication and everything. And in an age where occultism is just rampant, where the homosexuality and the killing of babies that are unborn is normal. Yeah, God has chosen us to be in this time, in this place, and that God doesn't do stuff. The God I know doesn't just do stuff randomly. Right. He didn't just pick a date and throw me out here. And so I think that we happen to live in a time where it's our responsibility to tell people, to say, hey, I know you don't care about this politics stuff, but you do feel like something's wrong, in your heart. There is something wrong, and this is what it is. This politics stuff is baloney, and there's a real spiritual war going on. And here's what I think it is. And I used to, it's so funny. I used to go out and just hand people freedom to fascism, because that was the one that woke me up, right? And led me to become a Christian. So I figured I'll just give everybody freedom to fascism, and then they'll become Christians. And of course, it never works like that. But one way I've learned after years and years of trying this and talking to different people that it does work is to just don't get, and it's hard for me, somebody who's excited about it or likes to talk, to not get preachy and to pick my moments well, but to pick them well and just say what I think it is, with some spiritual discernment, what's going on with this or what's going on with that. Because people who have just straight up laughed in my face, like, you are so ridiculous, have come back later and said, that kind of makes some sense. I was doing some more thinking about that. What do you think about this? And this time they don't laugh. They just go away kind of quietly. Right. And then they come back and they ask the same thing again. And then they start to kind of argue. All right. And this continues on. And eventually you just, when people look at me, I just want to see, I just want them to see me pointing to the sky. Like, that's all that's important. Right. I can tell you about September 11th. I can tell you about nanothermite or the alien deception or alien grays or the Lester Crowley's magical numbers, or whatever you want to talk about. And I think God will bring these people into our lives. I was at a bookstore just the other day, and this guy comes up. I was playing chess on one of those giant chessboards with my girlfriend. And this guy comes up and he says, oh yeah, you're like playing chess. Yeah, it's got a lot of hidden meanings and stuff. And I just like, yeah, I know. And so I look over, it's a Freemason, Freemasonic game, right? And he just like looks at me and his mouth just drops open. He's like, well, yeah, it is. And he goes on to tell me all this stuff about Freemasonry and alchemy and all this stuff. And it was one of those moments where it's just like, all right, God's throwing a slow pitch over home plate here. It's like, Tim hit this out of the park. And I just said, hey, look, man, you gotta get away from this stuff. This book he's got a book called Alchemy for Dummies. He just bought and stuff. Oh, God. And I'm like, look, man, it's Jesus. It's Jesus. He's, well, I'm a Christian, but I just think the Bible's an allegory and this and that. And it reminds me, I got to email him back. But these people, I think God will give us the opportunity to speak to these people. I've been given that opportunity so many times because I happen to know about these things. And so it's funny. I don't want, that was one of the reasons I started Revelations Radio News, because it's so often the case where people get on there and just like scream the sky is falling. And I want to be not only a Christian that's doing it, but a calm one. Right. Who's saying that, if they come take me away, they're going to come take me away. Worry not what you will say, for the Holy Spirit will give you the words in the time and the day. It doesn't matter, know. So let's just talk about it. Let's work it out. If they come, let's just take it as it comes. God wins. I know it. Yeah. He's a real God and he wins. And your crystals and the 9/11 stuff, all that stuff isn't going to matter. Neither is this rat race that we're all running. Yeah. It's just Jesus.
I agree. And yeah, I was in a library a couple months ago and I think I had a couple stacks of books or whatever in front of me. And this guy came up to me and he's like, oh, ancient history or something. And he got into the Sumerians and the Anunnaki and all that stuff. And yeah, it was same feeling of like, oh man, this is too easy. You just know those situations when you come across something like that and you start a conversation with someone. Those moments are weird because I've had moments where I'm like, I don't feel comfortable sharing Jesus in those moments sometimes, but you have to. Like, it's just like, this is exactly why I look into all this stuff. I mean, it's this conversation right here. So, and sometimes they don't take it well or whatever, and they have their own theories of Jesus and they try to push that on you, but at least you put a rock in their shoe, maybe in the future they'll come to realize the truth. But, I think it's a lifestyle, and I think I wrote in the Christian Conspiracy Theorist articles there, I'm referencing it again just because I recently finished all of it. And there's a certain level of faith that is required to be a Christian who studies like conspiracies and aliens and all this stuff, because we're like going into fire. Like we're just walking right into all the stuff that the enemy has thrown out, and we're just trying to like make our way through it, make sense of it, and ultimately, point to Jesus. But it's not the easiest thing. It's like the biggest scenic route you can take, because it's going through all the sludge of society and culture and everything else. So, again, I don't think it is for everyone, because it does take a toll on you. Like we were talking to Peter Goodgame a couple weeks ago, and he had mentioned how he stopped studying all this stuff for a while because he just, it was just overwhelming. So there's definitely a balance, but I do think that it requires a certain level of faith to really, be someone to, and I've heard Chris and other people tell people that are coming right out of the New Age, like, look, don't focus on anything New Age. Like, even though they have that sense of like, oh, I've been fooled, I need to expose the New Age movement or whatever. Right. It's like, no, just chill out for a while. Just go with your Bible for a while, learn the Word of God, and there will be a time when, you're ready to expose that stuff, full on. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's so easy for people to get hostile too. We've come in contact with some people who, become new Christians and, are so fired up, and then something happens and they just get so hostile. Yeah. Just bringing the fire and brimstone.
Tom Bionic on the Future Quake used to say the Christian firing squads are in circles.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I don't want to point just at the new Christians, because there's a lot of older traditional Christians who do the same thing, and it's just everybody's just talking about how those Christians are are working for the devil. And it's just,
And I'm sure we've done some of that too. Like point at somebody like, yeah, that's satanic, man. And it's, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but we just tend to do that as people. So,
but it's all the body of Christ, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the church building. I guess you guys work in a church building that attracts a certain kind of people. In Christ is shared there. We're just trying to get to the private place, the secret place inside people's homes. Where
Right.
where they're trying to seek these things, and we just want to be there. The body of Christ. Just a toe does something different than your eyeball does. We're all members of it, and I think that we have been given a big task here. Who happen to know a lot of these things and believe in Jesus, and I'm just kind of beating a dead horse there. I mean, it's just.
I think we've been beating it for a while now, but it's good. It's good to flush it out.
Well. Yeah.
That horse, man, is good and dead.
So dead. So dead.
So dead.
Oh man.
So many deads.
I love one thing I love about Revelations Radio News is just the level of sarcasm, and I know Andrew probably brings that to the table, but there was a couple shows where you guys were talking about Bill Gates and all the stuff he does, and I was walking my dogs and I just started cracking up laughing, and people are probably looking at me like, man, that guy's weird, he's walking his dog, he's laughing. But you guys had me rolling for a good hour or something. Just the sarcasm was ridiculous, and I think that's needed though. It is kind of a heavy topic if you sit and think about it, but if you can't like sort of make fun of it in your own way, it is really depressing. So
and that's something we don't plan at all. I think it naturally comes out when we talk about something like that. And
some things just warrant sarcasm.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And a lot of it happens to have to do with the Illuminati and
and the darkest
and the elites of the world.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Anything else, Tim, that you wanna drop in? You want to kick the horse a couple more times?
Let's find a new horse.
Let's find a new horse. Have I been rambling on too much?
No, not at all. Not at all.
No, I don't think so. I think you guys are doing an awesome job, and I enjoy it. I really like the idea of working with both of you guys to, you guys do such and such thing, and we'll do the other, and try and just bring more people. I'm just pointing them towards Jesus through Chris. Like, here, go talk to Chris. He'll answer your emails. He'll answer your questions. Yes, we care about it. But
I always wonder how he gets back to everyone, because a lot of times he does like he records a voice message for you.
Yeah.
I've gotten somewhere it's like him talking for like 25 minutes, and it's like, oh, dude, you really spent 25 minutes, or more probably, because he recorded it and then whatever. That's dedication.
I think he spends hours a day answering emails, or I think he only does it on 2 days now. But
he spends tried to streamline it.
Quite a bit of time doing it. Yeah,
that's the way to do it, though.
Yeah, I mean, and he's, I'm telling you, when I was in, that questioning mode, I was sending emails to him and getting those audio responses, and they were hugely important to me.
Yeah, it's like a little personal podcast.
Yeah.
So there you have it. Tim Kilkenny, co-host of Revelation Radio News. Thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Thank you guys for having me. It's really cool what you guys are doing here, and I just hope that the Lord continues to bless your work in the future.
Absolutely awesome.
As well.
And Tim, where can we listen to the show?
You can go to revelationsradionews.com, or of course, it'll be listed just like your show on revelationsradionetwork.com.
Very good. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in once again to Canary Cry Radio. And as always, think outside the cage.
Awesome music. Awesome music.
Yeah.
Audio overlay.
Some music. Illuminati quote.
Crickets. Bird
Bird
chirping.
Tweet. Oh, so much branding of birds.
I feel a little bit offended. Is that normal? Why do I feel offended? I'm like, you guys are making fun of my editing skills,
awesome.
man.
Hey, it's awesome.
No, we're
It's
not
awesome.
making fun of it.
It's awesome. No, I don't know. I'm
No, I'm
sorry.
kidding.
I've listened to every single episode, so I'm almost jealous. I'm jealous. It's all out of jealousy. I'm saying that. I play the same thrice song every other episode and the same dubstep drop to enter in every episode, and I mouth breathe on the microphone. And you guys are just doing an awesome job, and I'm just jealous. So you should take it as a compliment, man.
Mouth breathing.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Canary Cry Radio. The show notes for this episode and many others are available at canarycryradio.com. Make sure to connect and like our Facebook page at facebook.com/canarycryradio. Follow us on Twitter at Canary Cry Radio. If you would like to share the show in video format, you can find us on YouTube by searching Canary Cry Radio. Review us on iTunes with 5 stars and give us a thumbs up on stumbleupon.com. We would like to thank those of you who have given us your support, prayers, and donations. If you would like to join us and support Canary Cry Radio financially, you could do so by visiting canarycryradio.com and clicking the support tab. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, remember to think outside the cage.